Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings here on NowTV. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I really appreciate you being with me. Listen, let me urge that you go onto my YouTube channel and you look up the special video on the question, is a third temple being built in fulfillment of prophecy? I'm telling you, all over YouTube, all over the internet, we're hearing claims. I was watching some videos just the other day. I was listening to some preachers that were saying, "Boy, they're in the process of building the third temple right now. They've got the framework built, they've got the foundation built, they've got this, they've just got all this material, etc., etc." I mean, we are in the last days. Ladies and gentlemen, there are so many problems with that. Biblical problems. Let me urge you to go back or to go to my YouTube channel and to look up that video. Is a third temple being built in fulfillment of prophecy? I think you're going to find that video will open your mind. It will help you to see some of the incredible problems with what we are being told today. We're told America has to support Israel no matter what. Why? Well, because as we're about to get into in this video, God made a promise to Abraham, and actually that promise is misunderstood by the dispensational world. But the Lord told Abraham, "In you and your seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed." And he said, "I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you." And the way that's understood is, well, if we do not stand with Israel as the corporate national body, America will be cursed. Did you watch the Ted Cruz interview with, oh my goodness, I just went totally blank. The young man. Anyway, it was quite a heated exchange. Tucker Carlson, I'm sorry. I knew I'd get it in a minute. And Ted Cruz says, "Well, when I was a young boy in Sunday school, I heard this passage taught. I will curse those who curse you. I will bless those who bless you. And we were told we have to stand with Israel no matter what." Well, folks, that promise was to Abraham personally. It was not given to the nation like it was to Abraham personally. Now, did God bless Israel as a nation? And did he bless those nations that blessed Israel? Well, to a certain extent, yes. But that was may I call it, a bleed off from the promise given to Abraham. My point being this, all right? When people go to Genesis chapter 12, and they say, "We today must bless Israel lest we be cursed," they're guilty of a massive job of eisegesis, reading something into the text, because it fails to consider that God's choosing of Israel, that God's blessing of Israel was all dependent on Israel's obedience to the law of Moses. Listen, folks, just take the time to read Deuteronomy chapters 28 to 30 and Leviticus chapter 26 and consider these 2 points. Number one, God's blessing of Israel was strictly, absolutely dependent on Israel's obedience to the law of Moses. Let that soak in. Point number 2, the law of Moses is no longer valid. That means that all of those blessings that accrued to Israel, all of those curses that accrued to nations not blessing Israel, are no longer in effect. It is anachronistic, therefore, to say, hey, America has to stand with Israel. Now, look, I've said this very, very often. I've said it in repeated venues. If America believes that it's in our best national interest, security interest, to support that nation that calls itself Israel, that's one issue. But for America to put our peace, our safety, our security at risk because we think, because our leaders believe that Israel is God's chosen people today, is a dangerous foreign policy belief. It's dangerous. People have died. Unfortunately, people will die because of that misguided theology. Okay, so I will get off of my soapbox at this point, and I will simply urge you again to go to YouTube and to search for my video on my channel, Don K. Preston video YouTube channel, and search for that video. Is the third temple being built in fulfillment of Bible prophecy? It's been very, very active in views. So go there and look that up. Now, since we're talking about Abraham and the blessings of Abraham, the covenant with Abraham that God made with him, then this raises some really, really serious issues. Now, remember, here on NowTV, we have been examining this entire issue under the umbrella of the challenge of Christ. God promised several things to Abraham. He made some national, physical, materialistic promises to Abraham. And he said, I will make of you, Abraham singular, many nations. Okay? And he also promised to give him the land. Okay? I have demonstrated in time past how God kept those promises. He gave Israel, listen, Deuteronomy chapter 34 points out that God wasn't promising that land to Abraham individually, specifically. He was promising to give that land to Abraham's descendants. Deuteronomy 34, 1-4. Just go there and read it. I'm not going to take the time to go through it. God fulfilled those promises. Jeremiah 32 teaches that. Nehemiah 9 teaches that. Joshua 21, 43 and following teaches that. At every point of time in Israel's history, Israel acknowledged that God had fulfilled his promises to give them the land. Every point of time in their history. So God fulfilled the nationalistic promises to make Israel a great nation, as the sand of the sea, as the stars of the sky. Just read 1 Kings chapter 4, 20 and 21. So he fulfilled those nationalistic promises, but he also promised, in you and your seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed. Now, I've got to lay this down very quickly so that I don't want to lose track of my time here, as I have a tendency to do, in case you hadn't noticed, because I love to talk about this. I love to expand it so that you have as much information as possible to make up your own minds, to examine the scriptures, to see what they actually say. This promise that God made to Abraham, in you and your seed, singular, shall all nations. Now keep in mind, at the time God made that promise, Israel as a nation did not exist. God was therefore making a promise that applied to all nations, not just to Israel. And if you go back to chapter 11 of Genesis, we find there a reference to 70 nations that had said, let us build a tower that we may reach the heavens. They wanted to be like God. And God said, let us go down and see what they're doing. Let us confound their language. So he scattered them, sent them into exile. These are not the tribes of Israel. And yet they are the nations, pagan nations, that God said, in you and your seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed. Okay. That promise to bless the nations therefore included non-Israelite nations. And then God developed the nation of Israel through Jacob, who became Israel and had 12 sons and was born the nation of Israel. So, the nature of that promise, that Abrahamic promise, has to be understood and has to be identified. There's the nationalistic promise to create a nation. He kept the promise. But he also promised to bless all nations. When we understand that the problem that the nations were under was sin and exile, just like the problem of the garden was sin, death, and exile, then the blessing of Abraham is nothing less than resurrection. The nations were dead. Just recently, I was in correspondence with someone, and they espoused the ridiculous Israel-only doctrine. And I asked them a question. Were the pagan nations considered to be in darkness? Yes, they were. Were the pagan, non-Israelite nations considered to be dead? Yes, they were, he said. Okay, therefore, when Israel was taken off into Assyrian captivity and the nations swallowed them up, Hosea chapter 8, verse 8, they became dead. Yes or no? Yes, they did. Why? Well, because God killed them by sending them off into Assyrian captivity, and the Assyrians and the other surrounding nations were dead. And thus, when God sent Israel and eventually Judah into captivity together, were they in darkness? Well, of course they were. So, when God said he was going to call those in darkness to light, resurrection, and those who were dead and bring them to life, folks, he was promising not just Israel would be brought to life, not just Israel would be given the light, but the darkness in which they dwelt would be brought to light, and those who were in the death of the pagan nations, they would also be brought to life. Look, you can't have God saying, not only did God say, I'm going to bring the 10 tribes out of darkness, he said, I'm going to bring light to darkness. Do you catch that? God's promises of life and light were not strictly to Israel. That's why God said, in you and your seed will all nations of the earth be blessed, because all nations would be brought out of death and darkness. Paul's writing to the church at Rome, made up of pagan converts as well as Jewish converts. And he says, and now you know what time it is. It's high time to waken out of sleep. For now is our salvation nearer than when we first believed. The night, darkness, the night is far spent. The day, the light, is at hand. It's already shining. Just like John said, 1 John chapter 2, 6 to 8. Even now, the darkness is passing away. Even now, the true light is already shining. Folks, this is beautiful, beautiful imagery. It is beautiful thought, and it tells us that God's plan through Abraham was to provide resurrection from sin, death. That doctrine, as I have already shared with you extensively, Matthew chapter 8, verse 11, many shall come from the east and the west and shall sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom. Well, what is that sitting down in the kingdom? It's the messianic banquet. This is resurrection, because it's taken from Isaiah chapter 25, 6 to 8, which has the messianic resurrection banquet at the time of the resurrection. Here's the blessing of Abraham. Who would be included? Those from the east and the west. Who was in the east and the west? Well, it certainly includes Israel that was scattered abroad, but it does not exclude the nations of the east and the west, the north and the south, to which Israel had been scattered. It's anyone of the east and the west. So, when would that resurrection out of that sin death, when would that Abrahamic inheritance take place? Now, here's something you have to understand. In the dispensational world, they believe that Israel is the key to eschatology. Well, I agreed with that to a certain point. Let me state my agreement. Every tenet of eschatology was embedded in God's promises to Old Covenant Israel. I teach that. I've taught that for years. I have defended that view in debate after debate after debate. Paul said his doctrine of the resurrection was nothing but what Moses and the law and the prophets said would take place. So Israel, absolutely was fundamental to understanding biblical eschatology. Once again, I've taught that for years. But here's the distinctive difference that dispensationalists fail, refuse, or simply overlook to see. The actual inheritance of those eschatological blessings would only come at the time of the passing of Old Covenant Israel. Remember Matthew 8? You realize I left part of it out, didn't you? And I did so on purpose. When would that Abrahamic messianic inheritance at the messianic resurrection banquet take place? When the sons of the kingdom are cast out. Now, last week I promised you that we would go to Galatians chapter 3. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of what I'm sharing with you this morning and what I will continue to share with you in this regard. Because my dispensational friends, they tell us, well, we're waiting for the kingdom to come into existence after the rapture of the church, after the appearance of the man of sin. after the building of the third temple. And folks, don't forget, in the dispensational view, the third temple is the man of sin temple. It's the temple that he authorizes. And yet we're told they're building the third temple today. Well, that's not very good news, really. If the third temple is the temple, I'm sorry to digress, but it's so important. If the third temple is built and authorized by the man of sin, and if the third temple is currently being built, then where's the man of sin who has authorized that? Where's the man of sin that has made a treaty with Israel to do that? Where is he? No man has authorized Israel to rebuild that temple. You say, well, the government has. That's not the man of sin. The man of sin is an individual in the dispensational paradigm. Are you going to argue that Netanyahu is the man of sin? That raises all sorts of interesting questions, doesn't it? So anyway, in dispensationalism, after the building of the third temple, the man of sin breaks the treaty, turns on Israel, engages in what is called the Great Tribulation. At the height of the Great Tribulation, Israel cries out to Jesus. He comes in the second coming, destroys the man of sin, builds the Messianic temple, and initiates the millennium. So, we therefore have the question, when will the Messianic, Abrahamic promises be fulfilled? According to dispensationalism, it is when Israel is rescued and Israel rules in the Messianic kingdom for 1,000 years. Now, was the millennium a promise made to Israel? Yes, it was. What would initiate the millennium? Resurrection. That's the dispensational paradigm. But here's what you've got to see from Scripture. Let's go to Galatians 3. We're running low on time. In Galatians chapter 3, Paul spoke of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, that the blessings of Abraham might come on the Gentiles through Jesus Christ. Abrahamic promise extended to Gentiles. That we might, that's Israel, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit by faith. This is almost circular, but it's true. Israel would be saved when the Gentiles were brought in. And the fullness of the Gentiles would help bring in the salvation of Israel. I can't develop that. So Paul says, brethren, I speak after the manner of men, though it be but a man's covenant, no man disannuls or adds thereto. Now to Abraham and his seed. See, Paul's dealing with the Abrahamic promises, the Abrahamic inheritance. What was the Abrahamic inheritance? Resurrection. It was a heavenly city and a heavenly country, according to Hebrews chapter 11, verses 11 through 16. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He does not say unto seeds as of many, but as of one, and that one being Christ. And this I say, that the covenant that was confirmed before of God in Christ, the law, what law was that? The law of Moses. The law, which was 430 years after, cannot disannul that it should make the promise of none effect. Wait a minute. Abrahamic promise. Abraham, in you and your seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed. That's resurrection promise. The law came 430 years after that Abrahamic covenant. But wait, the law itself could not provide that resurrection life, as we're going to see as we continue our study of Galatians 3 and 4. The law could not give that life. Galatians 3, 20 and 21. Now, I got to digress here very, very quickly. In the dispensational paradigm, when Israel rejected the kingdom offer from Jesus, God suspended the prophetic countdown of Daniel 9, withdrew the kingdom, and established the church as an emergency interim measure. One dispensational author after another says the church was not foretold anywhere in the Old Testament. You know what the strange thing is, however? This is really quite funny. While on the one hand, they insist the church was not foretold, not predicted, not prophesied anywhere in the Old Testament, we are told that when Peter in Acts chapter 2 cited Psalms 110, "Sit thou at my right hand," speaking of Messiah, "until I make thy enemies thy footstool," which is the most commonly quoted, most often quoted Old Testament prophecy in the entire New Testament. What do dispensationalists say? Oh, the events of Pentecost were the fulfillment of Psalms 110. But wait a minute. The events of Pentecost was the establishment of the church. Therefore, the establishment of the church was foretold in Psalms 110, completely, totally, 100% refuting the dispensational view that the church was not foretold in the Old Testament. Well, I've done it again. I'm completely and totally out of time. Please read Galatians 3, 16 and following in preparation for next week. See you there.